25 now, and I can't remember anybody except the Queen bee.
I'm 75 years old now, and the only person I still remember with crystal clarity is the Queen bee herself. Even as the years blur so many faces and moments, that name, that presence, still cuts through the fog like a diamond. But tonight's story isn't about memory fading. It's about a memory that refused to stay buried. The state banquet was supposed to be a masterpiece of royal theater. Polished smiles, glittering protocol, crystal glasses catching the light from a dozen chandeliers, and the carefully orchestrated image of a united royal family presenting strength and dignity to the world. Foreign dignitaries, diplomats, and high society guests filled the grand hall, expecting elegance and harmony. What they witnessed instead was a single silent instant that shattered the illusion completely. Princess Catherine sat at the table with her usual grace, but something shifted in her expression the moment her eyes landed on the brooch pinned to Camilla's gown. It wasn't a similar piece. It wasn't a symbolic tribute. It was Diana's brooch, the actual jewel, the very one Catherine had always believed carried too much weight, too much history, and too much pain to be worn without the deepest meaning, permission, and respect. In that frozen heartbeat, the entire atmosphere of the room changed. The air grew thick. Conversations hushed. And the carefully constructed facade of royal unity began to crack. Catherine did not blink. She did not turn away. For several long seconds, the Princess of Wales sat perfectly still, as if her body had registered the shock before her mind could fully process it. Across the table, Camilla felt the intensity of that gaze land on her like a physical touch. Sharp. Unmistakable. The Queen Consort's fingers moved instinctively toward the brooch, almost as if trying to shield it or hide it from view. But it was too late. The moment had already been seen. William noticed the movement first. The prince's eyes flicked from his wife to the jewel, and something inside him visibly hardened. This was far more than an ornament. This was memory pinned to silk. This was grief placed deliberately into public view under the brightest lights of the monarchy. The banquet mattered so deeply because it was never meant to be an ordinary dinner. A state banquet is one of the most formal and symbolically significant events in the royal calendar. A carefully staged display of friendship between nations, projection of power, national dignity, and above all, the unity of the royal house. King Charles had wanted this evening to appear calm and controlled. He needed it. After weeks of private strain, whispered tensions, and behind-the-scenes difficulties, the monarch required the room, and the world watching, to believe that the family still moved as one. Catherine understood that burden perfectly. She had always respected the delicate balance of royal duty. She knew the immense cost of breaking the rhythm of such a meticulously planned ceremony. Yet she also understood, perhaps better than anyone else in that hall, what the cost of silence would be. If she said nothing, Diana's name and legacy would once again be quietly swallowed by protocol and convenience. William slowly reached for Catherine's hand beneath the table. Not to restrain her, but to steady her. She felt his touch and gently pulled back. That tiny movement told him everything he needed to know. The princess was not acting from mere temper or impulse. She was acting from a deep, authentic pain that had been building for years. Camilla looked down at her plate, then up again. Her face changed in that instant because she knew Catherine had recognized the brooch immediately. Charles saw it too. The monarch's carefully composed expression tightened, and for the first time that evening, his iron control showed signs of cracking. The room kept breathing, but only barely. Tension rippled outward like a stone dropped into still water. Then Catherine rose from her chair. The quiet in the hall became dangerous. Servers paused mid-step. Guests turned their heads toward the head table. William stood half a second later, close enough to demonstrate solidarity, yet far enough to allow his wife to speak with her own voice and authority. And then the princess gave the order that no one in that room, not even the most seasoned royal insiders, had expected. She asked for the entire service to stop. Camilla froze completely. Charles looked from Catherine to his wife, and in that moment the king understood that the damage had already been done. This was no small breach of etiquette. This was Diana's shadow returning powerfully through the one symbol that carried perhaps the heaviest emotional weight of all. Before the room could fully comprehend why Catherine had halted everything, the people closest to Diana's legacy began to feel exactly what was at stake. In that grand hall, the brooch did not mean the same thing to everyone present. To Camilla, it was intended as a symbol of royal acceptance and continuity. To Charles, it represented a dangerous reminder of a past he had never fully escaped, no matter how many years had passed. To William, it was his mother's memory resurfacing at the absolute worst possible moment, reopening wounds that never truly healed. And to Catherine, it was a sacred line crossed in public, beneath chandeliers, in front of the world. Catherine held herself with remarkable composure, but the pain had already reached her face. She had spent years honoring Diana's memory with genuine care, never turning it into a weapon, never exploiting it for attention, and never allowing private grief to become public performance. That was precisely why this moment cut so deeply. Diana was not merely a name from the past for her. She was William's mother. She was the woman whose absence still shaped his silence, his caution, his fierce protectiveness over his own family, and the quiet strength he carried every single day. William saw the brooch and his jaw tightened with that quiet intensity he had perfected over the years. The prince had always guarded anything connected to Diana with deep, almost reverent protectiveness. In the language of the palace, royal jewelry was never simple decoration. A brooch could convey messages, carry history, and sometimes even deliver quiet statements of power or remembrance. This particular piece carried an open wound. A royal state event like this was designed to project unity above all else. But one single object had transformed that unity into something painful and deeply personal. Camilla tried desperately to keep her composure. She lifted her chin, maintained her posture, and attempted to behave as though nothing unusual had occurred. Yet her hand betrayed her. She touched the brooch once, then quickly lowered her fingers, suddenly aware that every eye near the head table had followed that small movement. She had wanted acceptance. She had hoped the jewel would signal that old pain had finally been healed. Instead, it communicated something far colder, that someone else's grief had been borrowed without true consent. Charles shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His discomfort became impossible to ignore. He knew the brooch was tied to private conversations that had already created divisions behind closed palace doors. He also knew Catherine was not the type of woman who would challenge centuries of royal ceremony without profound cause. The monarch glanced toward William, then toward Camilla, and his face carried the heavy burden of a past that refused to remain buried at the exact moment he needed absolute control. Catherine felt a wave of emotions in sequence, sadness first, then shock, then a quiet but powerful resolve. She looked at William and understood that he had seen exactly what she had seen. The prince did not need to speak. His silence was filled with hurt, and that shared hurt gave her the courage to remain standing in a room that desperately wanted her to sit down and smile for the sake of appearances. Sophie, ever the trusted confidant, noticed the shift before most others. She leaned gently toward Catherine, her voice low, controlled, and heavy with warning. She whispered that this was not the first time the brooch had caused alarm within the family. Catherine did not reply, but her eyes changed.
William saw it. Charles saw it. Camilla felt it.
That whisper pulled the entire story backward to the hidden moment that had made Catherine's reaction almost inevitable. This confrontation did not truly begin at the banquet table. It began weeks earlier during a private family ceremony at Kensington Palace, where Diana's most personal pieces were being carefully reviewed for a future memorial tribute. Catherine had made only one request in that meeting, that the brooch remain untouched until William himself decided its proper place in his mother's legacy. But during that quiet, emotionally charged gathering, Camilla made a request that transformed a private memory into a deep royal fault line. Catherine remembered that day with painful clarity. The gathering had been small, intimate, and heavily guarded from outside attention. Discussions about a planned public tribute to Diana carried immense emotional weight for everyone involved. William had entered the meeting already tense, because anything connected to his mother was never simply history to him. It was childhood. It was profound loss. It was the wound that still lived behind every royal smile he wore in public. Sophie had sat close to Catherine, observing every subtle movement with the calm vigilance of someone who understood the family's hidden pressures better than most. The brooch was not merely another item in the royal collection. The royal collection includes both personal and official pieces, often used for ceremony, memory, and public symbolism. When the sealed velvet case was placed before them, Catherine looked first to William. The prince did not touch it. He only stared, and his heavy silence told everyone present that the piece still carried living pain. Camilla had not been present for the initial part of that ceremony, but her name entered the conversation soon afterward. According to accounts later shared in private palace briefings, she asked Charles whether she could wear Diana's brooch at the upcoming state banquet as a meaningful gesture of unity. The queen consort believed the jewel could demonstrate that old divisions had finally been laid to rest. But Catherine saw the request very differently. To her, true unity could never be manufactured by taking another woman's deepest pain and displaying it proudly before the world. William spoke directly to Charles that same evening. He told his father that the brooch should remain unworn until he personally determined its place in Diana's legacy. Charles listened attentively, but he stopped short of making any firm promise. That silence wounded Catherine even more than an outright refusal would have. She understood palace hesitation. She understood carefully chosen words and political balancing.
But this felt different.
The monarch knew the object was profoundly sensitive, yet he left the door open. Catherine learned the full details of Camilla's request through Sophie, who relayed information from a recorded conversation kept by a senior aide. The princess felt deeply disturbed, not because Camilla sought dignity, but because the queen consort seemed prepared to borrow such a charged symbol from Diana without the full agreement of those most affected. William left that discussion visibly shaken, and Catherine watched him carry the pain quietly, as he so often did. That was exactly why the banquet became unbearable the moment she saw the brooch on Camilla's gown. The private warning had been ignored. Charles had remained silent. Camilla had proceeded anyway. And William had been forced to confront his mother's memory in the most public and painful way imaginable. So when Catherine rose from her chair, it was not impulse that guided her. It was the memory of a broken promise and a line that should never have been crossed. The room did not erupt into chaos. Instead, it froze in stunned silence. Catherine did not shout. She did not tremble. She simply looked across the table at Camilla and asked one quiet question that cut through every title, every rank, and every practiced smile in the hall. "Why are you wearing it?" The words were spoken softly, yet they landed with the force of a verdict. In that instant, the state banquet transformed from a display of national strength into a raw family reckoning. Catherine remained standing while the service halted around her. She was not interrupting a private family meal. She was stopping one of the monarchy's most carefully staged symbols of dignity, and every person in the room felt the gravity and danger of that decision. Camilla attempted to respond with royal calm. She lifted her chin and began speaking as though the brooch were merely an accessory. But her voice tightened halfway through. The queen consort knew the true significance. The guests might not fully understand the jewel's history, but the people who mattered most certainly did. Catherine knew. William knew. Charles knew. And that knowledge made Camilla's composure appear increasingly fragile. William rose slowly to stand beside his wife. He did not speak over her or try to soften her words. He simply stood close enough for the entire room to understand that she was not alone. His face carried the rare, visible pain he usually kept hidden from the world. This was his mother's memory being handled publicly, and he could no longer pretend it was merely an unfortunate fashion choice. Diana's name was never spoken aloud, yet it filled every silence between them. Charles leaned toward Camilla and quietly instructed her to remove the brooch. The king did not raise his voice, but the command still carried absolute weight. Camilla hesitated, only for a breath, yet that single pause changed the entire evening. Catherine saw it and her grief sharpened into disbelief. William saw it and his jaw locked. Charles saw it and his expression darkened, because hesitation in that moment looked dangerously close to defiance. Catherine wanted dignity. She also wanted truth. That internal battle raged inside her. Part of her wished to step back, sit down, and protect the evening from turning into a public scandal. Another, deeper part of her knew that silence would turn Diana's pain into mere decoration. So she held Camilla's gaze and refused to move. Camilla finally reached for the brooch. But the damage had already spread throughout the room like wildfire. Her hand shook slightly as she removed it, and that tiny tremor communicated more than any polished apology ever could. She had been exposed before guests who had come expecting royal unity, not a deeply personal wound reopening in real time. And stepped forward with a face carved in cold certainty. The Princess Royal did not offer comfort. Instead, she warned Charles in a low, steady voice that this was no longer about jewelry. This was about judgment, respect, and the soul of the institution. Once and named the real issue, the palace stopped treating the incident as a simple breach and began managing it as a full crisis of authority and legitimacy. Behind Catherine's quiet but firm stand was something the palace could not easily dismiss: genuine moral authority. She held no crown yet. She possessed no throne and no final signature over royal protocol. But in that moment, she held something far more powerful: the emotional trust of William, the living memory of Diana, and the public image of a future monarchy that could not afford to appear cruel or dismissive of its own history. Charles understood the shift immediately. While he still wore the crown and held legal authority, real power inside the family had shifted. That night, authority stood with Catherine because she had defended a memory the entire country still carried in its heart. And William stood firmly with her, because he knew that silence would have been a form of betrayal. In the side room afterward, Catherine sat with her hands folded, her face calm, but her heart still burning. She refused to soften what she had done. The palace would worry about appearances, guests, headlines, and protocol. But to Catherine, the deeper rule was human. Diana's legacy could not be treated as a styling choice or borrowed for convenience. William stood near the closed door, carefully choosing every word before facing his father. He told Charles that Catherine had not embarrassed the family, she had protected it. She had prevented one painful moment from becoming a permanent insult to his mother's memory. And supported Catherine with characteristic bluntness, reminding everyone that symbols can wound far more deeply than words. A public speech can be corrected. A written statement can be revised. But a symbol, once seen by millions, lives forever in people's minds. Camilla's team quickly tried to frame the brooch as a well-intentioned gesture of reconciliation. Sophie cut through that narrative with quiet force, reminding them that reconciliation cannot be forced upon the grieving. If William and Catherine had not agreed, then it was not unity, it was pressure disguised as grace. By midnight, the palace corridors hummed with fear rather than ceremony. Charles ordered a full review of Diana's personal jewelry archive. Every access, every approval, every decision would be traced. The question was no longer simply why Camilla wore the brooch. It became who allowed it to happen. Catherine later requested a private meeting with Camilla. No aides, no guards, no scripted language. In that small sitting room, away from titles and ceremony, the two women faced each other as human beings standing in Diana's long shadow. Catherine spoke with quiet sadness rather than anger. She explained that Diana's memory still carried living pain and could not be used in a performance of unity. Acceptance could not be taken from someone else's grief and pinned on like jewelry. It had to be earned slowly, gently, and with genuine respect.
Camilla listened.
The defensiveness eventually faded, replaced by visible shame. She removed the brooch completely and placed it on the table between them, promising she would not wear it again. William entered shortly afterward and saw the jewel resting there.
No words were needed.
The battle had changed. By morning, the private wound had become a national obsession. Images of the moment flooded every outlet. Catherine was portrayed not as reckless, but as protective. The public responded with flowers left at Kensington Palace gates and an outpouring of support for Diana's memory. Charles issued new restrictions on handling Diana's personal items. The monarchy had been forced to acknowledge that some lines could not be crossed, even in the name of unity. In the end, the banquet became the night Catherine proved that true loyalty to the crown does not mean blind silence. It means knowing when dignity has been crossed and having the courage to stand up. Diana's memory would no longer be treated as a symbol of convenience. It would be protected with the respect it deserved. The future of the monarchy would not be built by erasing or borrowing from the past. It would be built on honesty, remembrance, and the kind of quiet strength Catherine displayed when everyone else remained seated. That single moment changed the meaning of royal duty forever.